The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the metal hull of the M1A2 Abrams tank as it roared across the Iraqi desert. Inside the sweltering command hatch, Captain John Reynolds squinted through his periscope at the burning horizon. Baghdad, 2003. The radio crackled with desperate messages from other units caught in an unexpected ambush. Reynolds adjusted his helmet and spoke with the calm precision that had earned him his nickname. All Warhorse units, this is Iron Horse. Maintain formation Delta. Target bearing 179er. Prepare to engage. His gunner acknowledged the command as the massive 120mm smoothbore cannon adjusted its aim. The Tank Battalion moved in perfect harmony, like massive steel predators stalking their prey. When the order to fire came, the Abrams tanks erupted in synchronized fury, their depleted uranium rounds cutting through enemy armor like paper. When the dust settled, Reynolds stood among the wreckage, his face streaked with sweat and grime, surveying what remained of the opposing force. Not a single American tank lost. That had been 22 years ago. Now Colonel John Iron Horse Reynolds stood on a hilltop overlooking the San Joaquin Valley of California. Watching smoke rise from what should have been peaceful American soil, the binoculars in his weathered hands revealed what intelligence reports had confirmed 3 days earlier. Foreign tanks, bearing the markings of the Eastern Alliance, were advancing toward Garrison, his hometown, his responsibility. The wind carried the scent of burning fuel and the distant percussion of artillery. War had come to America against all odds and predictions. The joint Russian-Chinese military alliance had exploited new electronic warfare technology to blind American early warning systems and establish beachheads along the California coast. While the main American forces were scrambling to defend the eastern seaboard, the western states had been left vulnerable. Reynolds lowered his binoculars, the weight of his 58 years settling heavily on his shoulders. His weathered face, tanned from decades of service in foreign deserts, betrayed no emotion. Only his eyes, sharp blue beneath salt and pepper eyebrows, revealed the strategic calculations taking place behind them. "Sir," called his radio operator from the command Humvee, "Joint Chiefs on Secure Line Alpha." Reynolds took one last look at the valley below. Garrison, population 30,000, sat nestled among rolling hills, its strategic importance belied by its modest appearance. But Reynolds knew the truth. The Garrison Dam provided power to military installations throughout Northern California, and its water reservoir was critical for the entire region. If the Eastern Alliance captured it intact, they would control a vital resource. If they destroyed it, the flooding would devastate communities for hundreds of miles. Inside the command vehicle, Reynolds took the secure phone. "Colonel Reynolds." "Colonel, this is General Mitchell." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs' voice sounded strained, even over the encrypted line. "Situation report. Eastern Alliance forces approximately 30 miles from Garrison city limits. 2 mechanized divisions, heavily armored. They've destroyed our forward observation posts and captured Highway 99. We're tracking at least 70 main battle tanks, mostly Type 99A2s, but satellite imagery suggests they're being reinforced with something new, possibly T-14 armadas." A heavy silence followed. Reynolds had served with Mitchell in the Gulf. They both understood what those numbers meant. "What's your fighting strength, John?" Reynolds closed his eyes briefly. 104th Tank Battalion at 70% operational capacity, 28 M1A2 SEPU-3 Abrams operational, 14 Bradley fighting vehicles. Support units at approximately 60% due to the Sacramento engagement. And crew readiness? Reynolds thought of the faces of his men and women, some veterans, many reservists called to active duty when the invasion began. "They'll fight, sir, but we've lost good people already." "I need more than fight, John. I need a miracle." Mitchell's voice dropped lower. "The Pacific Fleet is engaged with Eastern Alliance naval forces. The 101st Airborne is defending Seattle. The 1st Armored is still mobilizing from Fort Bliss. The reality is, you're on your own for at least 72 hours. Reynolds absorbed this without comment. Part of him had known this call was coming. The 104th Tank Battalion, his command, was the last operational armored unit in the region. "Sir, request permission to fall back to more defensible position at Sacramento." "Denied, Colonel." Mitchell's response was immediate. "The President has designated Garrison Dam as critical infrastructure. It cannot fall into enemy hands, and it cannot be destroyed. Your orders are to hold at all costs for 72 hours. After that, the cavalry will arrive." Reynolds felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. Hold at all costs. The eternal soldier's burden. Understood, sir. John. Mitchell's tone softened slightly. The president asked for you specifically. Said if anyone can hold against impossible odds, it's Iron Horse Reynolds. After the call ended, Reynolds sat motionless for several long moments. His mind wasn't on the president's confidence, but on the faces of his battalion, faces that would not all survive the coming days. The memory of his father surfaced unbidden. Colonel William Reynolds, tank commander in Desert Storm, his voice gruff but steady on his deathbed 5 years earlier. Promise me, John, promise you'll never abandon your men. His father's hand, once strong enough to manhandle tank treads, had been fragile as paper when John clasped it. A Reynolds leads from the front, always has. Reynolds remembered the stories his father told him as a boy, tales of tank battles across North Africa, of Patton's Third Army slicing through German defenses in Europe. 3 generations of Reynolds men had commanded tanks in America's wars. His grandfather in World War II, pushing through the hedgerows of Normandy in a Sherman. His father in Desert Storm, leading Abrams tanks against Saddam's Republican Guard. And now John carrying that legacy on American soil. The thought was almost unimaginable. Outside the command vehicle, Reynolds found his executive officer waiting. Lieutenant Colonel William Bill Hargrove stood ramrod straight despite his 61 years. They had been at West Point together, commissioned in the same year, fought in the same wars. While Reynolds had risen through the ranks on the strength of his tactical brilliance, Hargrove had been the steady administrator, the man who made sure plans became reality. Joint Chiefs, Hargrove asked, his leathery face impassive. We hold garrison, 72 hours minimum. Hargrove didn't blink. Supply situations worse than we reported. APFSDS rounds at 40% of recommended loadout. Fuel reserves for maybe 4 days of combat operations. Reynolds knew the armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds were their best hope against the T-14s. Each depleted uranium penetrator could punch through advanced composite armor at ranges exceeding 2 miles. But they were in short supply, a casualty of peacetime budget constraints and the unexpected nature of this conflict. Then we'll have to make each shot count, Reynolds replied, his gaze returning to the horizon. Gather the company commanders. We move to defensive positions immediately. As Hargrove moved to execute the order, Reynolds unfolded a topographical map of the region. His trained eye noted the key terrain features, the potential avenues of approach, the choke points where his outnumbered forces might stand a chance. The dam itself sat in a valley 3 miles north of Garrison, protected by steep hills on either side, a perfect funnel for enemy forces, if properly defended. The sun was beginning its descent when Reynolds stood before the assembled officers of the 104th Tank Battalion. They had gathered in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Garrison, tactical maps spread across improvised tables. The faces looking back at him reflected a mixture of exhaustion, determination, and poorly concealed fear. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be brief. Eastern Alliance forces will reach Garrison within 18 hours. Our mission is to defend the city and the dam until reinforcements arrive in 72 hours. A murmur passed through the group. Reynolds raised a hand for silence. I won't sugarcoat this. We're outnumbered at least 3 to 1. The enemy has air superiority in this sector, and our own air support is committed elsewhere. He turned to the large tactical map of Garrison and its surroundings. We will establish 3 defensive lines. Alpha Company will take the northern approach along these ridgelines. He indicated the positions with a laser pointer. Bravo Company will defend the eastern corridor and the main highway. Charlie Company will establish mobile reserve positions here and here, ready to reinforce where needed. Captain Eleanor L. Ramirez, commander of Bravo Company, stepped forward. At 42, she was one of the few officers who transferred from aviation to armor, bringing with her a unique perspective on battlefield mobility. Colonel, with respect, conventional defensive positions will play into their numerical advantage. We should consider asymmetric placement. Use the urban terrain to our advantage. Reynolds studied her for a moment. Ramirez had proven herself in the early engagements of the invasion. Her unorthodox tactics saving lives when textbook approaches had failed. Elaborate, Captain. Ramirez moved to the map. We placed tank platoons here, here, and here. She marked positions within the city itself. Interlocking fields of fire, but with covered withdrawal routes. The buildings provide concealment and limit their ability to bring numbers to bear. We can channel them into kill zones here and here. Reynolds considered the approach. It violated conventional doctrine about keeping armored units in open terrain where they could maximize mobility, but conventional doctrine hadn't contemplated defending American soil against a technologically advanced enemy. The civilian government won't like tanks in the city, Hargrove pointed out. The civilian government isn't fighting this war, Reynolds replied, his decision made. Captain Ramirez's approach has merit. We'll implement a modified version. Bravo Company will deploy as suggested. Alpha will maintain conventional positions to the north as our anchor point. Charlie remains mobile reserve. He turned to face the youngest officer present. Lieutenant Reynolds, your platoon will provide security for the battalion TOC. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds stiffened. At 28, he was a mirror of his father in many ways. Same jawline, same intense blue eyes. But where the elder Reynolds carried himself with the easy confidence of experience, Michael projected a deliberate rigidity, a man constantly aware of living in a long shadow. Sir, my platoon is combat ready. We should be on the front line. The room fell silent. Everyone present knew the complicated dynamics between the colonel and his son. John Reynolds had never shown favoritism. If anything, he had been harder on Michael than any other officer. But perception mattered in a command structure. Your platoon has the newest gunners, Lieutenant. They need more seasoning before front-line engagement. The TOC position is vital and will likely see action. The unspoken message was clear. This wasn't about protection. It was about placing rookies where they could do the least damage. Michael's face flushed, but he nodded sharply. Yes, sir. Reynolds surveyed the room, making eye contact with each officer. The M1A2 Abrams remains the most advanced main battle tank in the world. Our thermal sights, depleted uranium armor, and targeting systems give us advantages even against their newest equipment. Use terrain to mask your movements. Conserve ammunition. Maintain communication discipline. He paused, letting his next words carry their full weight. We are the last armored unit between the Eastern Alliance and their objectives. Behind us are American families, American homes, American soil. For many of you, your own families. We stand here because there is nowhere else to stand. The warehouse fell silent. Reynolds continued, his voice steady and determined. In 72 hours, the 1st Armored Division will arrive with enough firepower to push the enemy back to the coast. Our job is to make sure there's still something for them to save when they get here. As the officers dispersed to their units, Hargrove remained behind with Reynolds. That wasn't about his green gunners, Hargrove said quietly. Reynolds gathered his maps. Bill, I've buried enough family members in the past 2 years. Sarah's cancer was... He stopped, unwilling to put into words what his wife's death had done to him. I'm not playing favorites. If anything, I'm compensating. Michael deserves front-line command, but I can't be objective about it. Hargrove placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. John, we've known each other for 40 years. You've always made the hard calls. But remember what you told me in Baghdad? Sometimes the right tactical decision is the wrong human one. Reynolds looked at his old friend, the weight of command momentarily visible on his face. If I start making decisions based on personal feelings, I'll get more people killed, Michael included. And if you overcorrect, you might waste your best resources. Hargrove nodded toward the door where Michael had exited. That boy is a Reynolds. Tank warfare is in his blood, just like his father and grandfather. Before Reynolds could respond, the door burst open and Sergeant Major Frank Caruso entered. At 52, Caruso was the embodiment of the professional, non-commissioned officer. Stocky, perpetually scowling, and utterly reliable. Sir, we've got a problem. Mayor's called an emergency town council meeting. Word is they're voting to declare Garrison an open city. Reynolds exchanged a glance with Hargrove. An open city declaration would mean no military defense, essentially surrendering Garrison without a fight. When? 1 hour at City Hall. Reynolds checked his watch. Get me transportation. And Caruso, find out everything you can about Eastern Alliance treatment of open cities in this conflict. After Caruso departed, Reynolds stared at the tactical map, lost in thought. You're thinking about Seattle, Hargrove said, reading his friend's mind. Reynolds nodded grimly. 3 weeks earlier, local officials in Seattle had declared their city open following the Geneva Convention protocols. The Eastern Alliance had accepted the surrender, occupied the city, and then systematically rounded up military-age males and government officials. Satellite imagery later revealed mass detention facilities established in local stadiums and parks. The people of Garrison deserve the truth, Reynolds said finally. They need to understand what's coming. Whether we defend the city or not. And what is coming, John? Reynolds looked up, his eyes hard. War, Bill, the kind we've spent our careers fighting elsewhere but never imagined would reach here. Outside, the sound of helicopters cut through the evening air as the battalion's remaining assets moved into position. Time was running short. City Hall stood in the center of Garrison, a colonial-style building with white columns and a copper dome. Under different circumstances, Reynolds might have appreciated its historical significance. Now he noted only its vulnerability to artillery and its poor defensive characteristics. The town council chamber was packed with citizens and local officials when Reynolds entered, still in his combat uniform, dust from the field clinging to his boots. Mayor Robert Wilson, a silver-haired man in his 60s with whom Reynolds had occasionally played golf before the war, looked up from the podium with obvious discomfort. Colonel Reynolds, we didn't expect military representation at this meeting. Reynolds removed his helmet, but remained standing at the back of the room. Considering you're discussing the fate of my area of operations, I thought I should be present. A murmur ran through the assembled citizens. Reynolds recognized many faces. Garrison had been his home when not deployed, the place he and Sarah had chosen to settle, where Michael had graduated high school. Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. We're discussing a proposal to declare Garrison an open city following the Geneva Convention protocols. This would designate Garrison as an undefended location, preventing it from becoming a battlefield, and surrendering it to the Eastern Alliance without resistance, Reynolds added, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. To save lives, Colonel, countered Councilwoman Helen Dexter, a longtime critic of military spending. We've all seen the footage from San Diego and Portland. Entire neighborhoods leveled in the fighting. Reynolds stepped forward, moving toward the central aisle. With respect, Councilwoman, I've also seen footage from Seattle and Sacramento after they were occupied. Public executions, detention camps, infrastructure deliberately destroyed. That's unconfirmed propaganda, someone called from the audience. I lost 37 soldiers confirming it personally, Reynolds replied, his tone level but carrying an edge that silenced the room. He turned to address the entire chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your fear. War has come to our homeland, something most of us never imagined possible. But declaring Garrison an open city won't protect you. He moved to a large map of the region displayed on the wall. The Eastern Alliance isn't interested in Garrison because of its charming downtown or its excellent schools. They want this. He pointed to the dam north of the city. Garrison Dam controls water resources for half the state and generates power for military installations throughout Northern California. They will take it, one way or another. Mayor Wilson stepped around the podium. Then why not evacuate civilians? Let them have the dam if it's inevitable. Because holding this position for 72 hours gives our reinforcements time to arrive in sufficient numbers to push them back, Reynolds explained. If we abandon Garrison now, we lose more than this city. We lose the entire regional defense posture. A middle-aged woman stood from the audience. Reynolds recognized her as Dr. Eleanor Thompson, Chief of Surgery at Garrison Memorial. Colonel, what exactly are you asking of us? To sit in our homes while tanks battle in our streets? Reynolds met her gaze directly. I'm asking you to evacuate if you can. And if you can't or won't, I'm asking you to support the defense of your city. We need volunteers for medical support, for logistics, for communications. Every civilian who helps frees a soldier to fight. And if we vote to declare an open city despite your objections, Mayor Wilson asked, then I'll have failed as a communicator, but my orders remain unchanged. The 104th Tank Battalion will defend Garrison Dam and the surrounding area with or without civilian cooperation. The room erupted in angry shouts and arguments. Reynolds remained impassive, allowing the initial reaction to wash over him. He had expected no less. When the noise began to subside, he spoke again, his voice quiet but somehow cutting through the chaos. My wife Sarah died in Garrison Memorial 2 years ago. Cancer. Many of you were at her funeral. He paused, the rare personal reference catching the room's attention. During her final days, she made me promise that if war ever came to our shores, I would protect this community as fiercely as I protected others around the world. I intend to keep that promise. An elderly man rose from his seat near the front, leaning heavily on a cane. Reynolds recognized him as retired Master Sergeant James Wilkins, who had served in Vietnam in the First Gulf War. I've seen war, Wilkins said, his voice carrying the gravitas of experience. It's ugly and it's cruel, but I've also seen what happens when good people don't stand against tyranny. He turned to face his fellow citizens. Colonel Reynolds isn't asking us to fight. He's asking us to support those who are fighting for us. And by God, that's what we should do. The chamber quieted as Wilkins's words sank in. Reynolds nodded gratefully to the old soldier, then addressed the council once more. I have tactical maps of anticipated battle zones. I can provide guidance on which neighborhoods face the highest risk. My medical teams will coordinate with hospital staff. Our engineers can help identify the safest shelter locations. But I need your cooperation, not your surrender. Mayor Wilson studied Reynolds for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll need time to discuss this, Colonel, but I believe we understand your position more clearly now. As Reynolds left City Hall, he found Sergeant Major Caruso waiting beside the Humvee, his weathered face grim. How bad? Reynolds asked. Intel update from Division, sir. Eastern Alliance advance elements moving faster than anticipated. New ETA at Garrison Perimeter is 0400 tomorrow. Reynolds checked his watch, less than 12 hours to prepare. And the T-14s? Confirmed by drone reconnaissance before it was shot down. At least a company of them, sir. Latest generation with the new Afghan active protection systems. Reynolds felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The T-14 Armada was Russia's most advanced tank, rarely deployed even in their own forces due to cost and complexity. If they were committing them here, Garrison was even more important than Joint Chiefs had indicated. The Afghan system is designed to defeat our Javelin missiles, Reynolds said, thinking aloud. Our Abrams still have the edge in main gun technology and fire control, but it'll be close. Sir, there's something else. Caruso handed over a tablet displaying intercepted communications. They're not just deploying tanks. They've got specialized combat engineers. Analysis suggests they're planning to seize the dam intact, not destroy it. Reynolds studied the data, his mind racing through implications. They want control of the water and power, not just denial to our side. That changes things. He handed the tablet back. Get me secure comms with all company commanders. We need to adjust the defense plan. Behind them, the western sky blazed orange as the sun slipped behind the coastal mountains. Reynolds couldn't help but wonder if it was the last sunset Garrison would see as a free American city. Back at the Battalion Tactical Operations Center, Reynolds found the command staff already assembled. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove had the tactical display updated with the latest intelligence. Captain Ramirez was reviewing urban fighting positions with her platoon leaders. Michael stood slightly apart, studying the terrain model with intense focus. The TLs had been established in the basement of Garrison Community College, its thick concrete walls offering protection against artillery and airstrikes. Computer screens displayed unit positions, intelligence feeds, and satellite imagery. Communications specialists monitored encrypted radio channels, maintaining the nervous system of the battalion. Reynolds moved to the center of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, timeline has accelerated. Enemy forces will reach our perimeter at approximately 0400 hours. We have confirmation they're deploying T-14 armadas supported by mechanized infantry. Their objective appears to be capturing Garrison Dam intact. He turned to the terrain model. This changes our defensive posture. Instead of 3 lines of defense, we'll establish 5 interlocking positions focused on protecting approaches to the dam while using the urban terrain to our advantage. Reynolds pointed to key locations on the model. Alpha Company will establish hold-down positions along these ridgelines, covering the northern approach. Your thermal sights give you advantage in the pre-dawn hours. Engage at maximum effective range, then fall back to secondary positions when pressured. Captain Thomas Murphy, commanding Alpha Company, nodded his understanding. A veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, Murphy was steady under fire, methodical in his approach to combat. Bravo Company will implement Captain Ramirez's urban defense plan with one modification. I want your 3rd platoon positioned here to cover the eastern bypass. The enemy may attempt to flank our main positions. Ramirez made notations on her tactical pad. We'll need additional anti-tank mines for the bypass, sir. Already allocated, Hargrove confirmed. Engineering team is laying them as we speak. Reynolds continued. Charlie Company will split into 2 task forces. One will remain as mobile reserve. The other will take defensive positions at the dam itself. The dam facilities include administrative buildings and maintenance structures that can provide cover for your tanks. Captain James Chen, Charlie Company's commander, studied the terrain model. Sir, if we position at the dam, we could be cut off if the main defenses fall. Correct, Captain. That's a risk we have to accept. Reynolds' tone made it clear this point was not open for debate. Your mission is to prevent capture or destruction of the dam facilities at all costs. For the next hour, Reynolds detailed the new defensive plan, assigning sectors and coordinating fire support. When he finished, the company commanders dispersed to brief their units, leaving Reynolds with Hargrove and Caruso. It's a solid plan, John, Hargrove said, studying the terrain model. But you're spreading us thin in sectors 3 and 4. Can't be helped. We need to protect those approaches to the dam. Reynolds rubbed his eyes, feeling every hour of the 3 days since he'd last slept properly. Frank, what's the status on ammunition distribution? APFSDS rounds prioritized to forward units, Caruso reported. Heat rounds to support elements. We've scrounged every working vehicle in the battalion for transport. Medical teams are establishing 3 field stations, with main treatment at the community college gymnasium. Reynolds nodded, his attention drawn to the city map. And civilian evacuation? Proceeding slowly, Hargrove said. About 30% of the population is left. The rest are either unable or unwilling. Keep the evacuation routes open as long as possible, Reynolds ordered. But priority goes to military traffic after 2100 hours. The command radio crackled to life. Warhorse 6, this is Ranger 1, priority message. Reynolds picked up the handset. Go for Warhorse 6. Sir, we have movement at grid coordinate Sierra Echo 39er. Mechanized reconnaissance elements, bearing Eastern Alliance markings. Reynolds checked the map. The coordinates were 10 miles north of their expected approach, suggesting the enemy was probing for weaknesses. Roger, Ranger 1, maintain observation, do not engage. Report any changes in strength or direction. He replaced the handset and turned to his officers. They're testing us. Send word to Alpha Company. I want anti-tank teams positioned along that ridgeline, but concealed. Let their recon elements pass, then hit any follow-up forces. As Hargrove relayed the orders, Reynolds stepped outside the TOC. The evening air was cooling rapidly, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. In the distance, he could see the lights of Garrison, citizens going about their lives despite the approaching danger. The surreal juxtaposition struck him forcefully. Somewhere beyond those hills, enemy tanks were advancing on American soil. Yet here, porch lights glowed. Televisions flickered behind curtained windows, and children likely slept in their beds. How many of those peaceful homes would still be standing 72 hours from now? His phone vibrated in his pocket. The caller ID showed Michael. Reynolds hesitated before answering. This is Colonel Reynolds. There was a pause on the line. Dad, it's me. Sir, Lieutenant Reynolds reporting. Reynolds softened his tone slightly. What is it, Michael? I've been reviewing the defensive positions for TOC security. There's a vulnerability in the southeastern approach. If I reposition my second platoon to these coordinates, we can cover it without weakening our primary position. Reynolds pulled up the tactical map on his tablet, examining the area Michael described. The lieutenant's assessment was correct, and the solution elegant. Good catch, Lieutenant. Implement your plan and update the battalion fire coordination matrix. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Another pause. Dad, I want you to know I understand why you assigned us to TOC security. I don't agree, but I understand. Reynolds felt a complex mixture of pride and concern. It wasn't personal, Michael. It was tactical. Everything with you is tactical. The words carried no accusation, just a simple observation. Mom used to say that was both your greatest strength and your biggest blind spot. The mention of Sarah caught Reynolds off guard. They rarely spoke of her, the loss still too raw. Your mother was usually right, he admitted quietly. She also said you'd never admit when you were protecting someone out of love rather than strategy. Michael's voice had softened. Good night, sir. I'll implement those position changes immediately. The line went dead before Reynolds could respond. He stood motionless, staring at the phone. Sarah had always seen through his professional facade, recognizing when his command decisions were influenced by deeper emotions. Had he been transparent to her about Michael as well? The memory of Sarah in her hospital bed rose unbidden, her once vibrant face gaunt from chemotherapy, but her eyes still bright with the intelligence and compassion that had captivated him decades earlier. John, she had whispered during one of her last lucid moments, promise me you'll let Michael find his own way. Not your way, not your father's way, his way. He had promised, of course, but standing on the brink of battle with enemy forces hours away, could he honor that promise and still fulfill his duty as a commander? His reflections were interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. A convoy of 3 Humvees pulled up to the TOC, the lead vehicle bearing the flag of a general officer. Reynolds straightened as Major General Howard Daniels, commander of the Western Defense Sector, emerged from the vehicle. "General Daniels, we weren't expecting you, sir." Reynolds saluted crisply. Daniels, a short, compact man with close-cropped gray hair, returned the salute. "At ease, Colonel. Let's talk inside." In the privacy of the command office, Daniels wasted no time. "I've just come from a briefing with the governor. He's concerned about your refusal to acknowledge Garrison's status as an open city." Reynolds maintained his professional demeanor. "Sir, I received no orders designating Garrison as an open city. My instructions from Joint Chiefs are to defend this position for 72 hours. Daniels paced the small office. "The situation is politically complex, Reynolds. The governor is trying to limit civilian casualties. He believes that by declaring certain cities open, he can focus the fighting in less populated areas. With respect, General, that's not how the Eastern Alliance operates. They're targeting infrastructure and strategic positions regardless of civilian presence." Daniels stopped pacing. "I'm aware of your assessment, Colonel. I'm also aware of your personal connection to this town. Is it possible that's clouding your judgment?" Reynolds felt a flash of anger, but kept his expression neutral. "My judgment is based on military necessity and the orders I've received from Joint Chiefs, sir. The Garrison Dam is critical infrastructure that must be defended. And if I were to order you to withdraw to positions outside the city limits, I would respectfully request written orders countermanding my current instructions from Joint Chiefs, sir." The two men locked eyes for a long moment. Finally, Daniel sighed. "You always were a stubborn bastard, John. That's why they sent you here instead of some politically sensitive academy product." He moved to the tactical display, examining the defensive positions. "Your plan is solid, given your resources, but you're facing odds that would make most commanders balk." "I'm not most commanders, sir." "No, you're not." Daniels turned to face Reynolds again. "The President has authorized me to inform you that if Garrison Dam is at risk of capture, Protocol Omega is in effect." Reynolds felt his blood run cold. Protocol Omega was the authorization to destroy critical infrastructure rather than allow it to fall into enemy hands. The resulting flood would devastate communities downstream for hundreds of miles. "General, if we destroy that dam, the civilian casualties would be catastrophic," Daniels finished, "which is why your primary mission remains defending it. But if that fails, we cannot allow the Eastern Alliance to control that resource." "Understood, sir." Daniels moved towards the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Colonel, I argued against Protocol Omega. But the strategic calculus at the highest levels is clear. This is bigger than one town or one dam." "It always is, sir." After Daniels departed, Reynolds remained in his office, the weight of this new responsibility settling over him like a shroud. Protocol Omega represented a worst-case scenario he had not allowed himself to contemplate. If the defense failed, he would be responsible not just for the loss of his command, but potentially thousands of civilian lives downstream. The magnitude of the decision was staggering. Military necessity versus humanitarian catastrophe. The cold equations of war brought home to American soil. Reynolds had made difficult choices in combat before, but never with such potential consequences for his own countrymen. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket, extracting a faded photograph. Sarah, Michael, and himself standing before the Garrison Dam 5 years earlier. A family outing, before cancer had taken Sarah, before the war had forced Michael and him into their current roles. The image showed a happier time, when the dam was simply an impressive feat of engineering, not a strategic objective to be defended at all costs. Reynolds carefully returned the photo to his wallet. There would be time for memories later. Now he needed to focus on the immediate future, on the battle that would begin in mere hours. He was still processing this when Sergeant Major Caruso knocked on his door. "Sir, we've got a situation developing. Mayor Wilson is on the perimeter with a group of civilian officials. They're demanding to speak with you." Reynolds checked his watch, just past 2200 hours, less than 6 hours before expected enemy contact. "What do they want, Frank?" "They're claiming we've illegally occupied city property for military purposes. They've brought the chief of police and are threatening to arrest our perimeter guards." Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, summoning patience. "Get Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove to deal with it. Tell him to be diplomatic but firm. We don't have time for civilian posturing." "Sir, the mayor specifically asked for you, said if you don't come, They'll consider it confirmation that you're acting without proper authorization. Reynolds grabbed his helmet and sidearm. Fine, have a security detail meet me at the main checkpoint. And Frank, make sure our people understand no confrontations with local police. We diffuse, not escalate. As Reynolds prepared to leave, he paused at the tactical display, studying the positions of his units. The 104th was as ready as it could be, given the circumstances. Equipment had been maintained, ammunition distributed, positions prepared. Now it would come down to the skill and courage of his soldiers. And he admitted to himself a considerable amount of luck. The main checkpoint had been established at the intersection of Highway 99 and the Garrison Access Road. When Reynolds arrived, he found a tense standoff underway. Mayor Wilson stood with Police Chief Thomas and 3 city council members, facing a line of soldiers who maintained a professional but unyielding posture. A small crowd of civilians had gathered to watch, some filming with their phones. Reynolds approached, recognizing the potential for a public relations disaster. Mayor Wilson, it's late for a civic visit. Wilson turned, his expression a mixture of anger and anxiety. Colonel Reynolds, you have placed military checkpoints on city roads without authorization. You've commandeered public buildings. You've ignored our city council's resolution declaring Garrison an open city. Mr. Mayor, I operate under federal authority during a time of war. The defense of Garrison and its critical infrastructure is my assigned mission. Chief Thomas stepped forward. Colonel, we respect your position, but the safety of our citizens is our primary concern. We cannot have tanks in our streets and soldiers occupying our public spaces. Reynolds addressed the chief directly. In approximately 5 hours, Eastern Alliance forces will reach this very intersection. They have artillery capable of striking from 15 miles away. They have air assets that can target any structure in this city. The time for administrative objections has passed. So you're just going to ignore civilian authority? Wilson demanded. No, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to protect civilian lives, including yours. Reynolds softened his tone. Look, I understand your position. You're trying to spare the city from becoming a battlefield. But declaring Garrison open won't achieve that. The Eastern Alliance wants the dam and the power station. They'll take them regardless of what papers you sign or declarations you make. He turned to address the watching crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I strongly urge you to evacuate if you haven't already. Southbound roads remain open. If you choose to stay, shelter in basements or reinforced structures. Stay away from military positions and major roads. One of the council members, an older woman Reynolds recognized as a former school teacher, spoke up. Colonel, many of our citizens can't evacuate. They're elderly, disabled, or lack transportation. Reynolds nodded. We've established a civilian shelter at Garrison High School. Military medical personnel are on site. Anyone who can't evacuate should report there. Mayor Wilson wasn't satisfied. And if we insist on removing your checkpoints, then I would be forced to explain to your officers that interfering with military operations during wartime falls under federal jurisdiction and could be considered obstruction. Reynolds met Wilson's gaze steadily. Robert, we've known each other for years. I'm not your enemy. The people coming down that road in a few hours are. Help me protect your citizens instead of fighting over jurisdiction. The standoff might have continued, but at that moment, the distant rumble of artillery changed everything. All eyes turned northward, where flashes illuminated the night sky. The sound of explosions rolled across the valley like thunder. Reynolds recognized it immediately. Preliminary bombardment. They're ranging their artillery. He turned to his radio operator. All units, Warhorse 6, enemy artillery active. Implement counter-battery protocols. Civilian assembly at main checkpoint, requesting immediate escort to designated shelter. To Mayor Wilson, whose face had gone pale, Reynolds spoke with quiet authority. Mr. Mayor, your time for political statements has ended. My men will escort you and these civilians to the high school shelter. I suggest you focus now on helping your people survive the night. The mayor stared at the northern horizon where more explosions bloomed. How long, he asked, his political bluster gone? If we're lucky, 3 days until reinforcements arrive. If we're not, Reynolds left the alternative unspoken. Wilson nodded slowly, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Tell me what you need from us, Colonel. Medical personnel, volunteers for logistical support, and cooperation from your police force to maintain evacuation routes and prevent panic. You'll have it. As the civilians were loaded into transport vehicles, Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove approached. Sir, forward observation posts report enemy armor moving into assault positions. They're coming earlier than expected. Reynolds felt a cold clarity descend, the familiar mental state that had carried him through countless battles. Alert all commands. Prepare for combat operations. I want Alpha Company to delay their advance, then fall back to primary positions. Hargrove hesitated. Sir, about Lieutenant Reynolds' platoon. What about it? Intelligence suggests the TOC may be targeted early. Their electronic warfare units have been probing for command communications. Reynolds considered this information. The Tactical Operations Center was the brain of his defense. If it were neutralized early, coordination would be severely compromised. But moving Michael's platoon could be seen as special treatment. In the distance, another artillery barrage lit up the sky, closer than the last. Reynolds could feel the percussion in his chest, the familiar prelude to ground assault. The enemy was moving faster than anticipated, compressing his timeline for defensive preparations. Before he could respond, another series of explosions erupted, closer this time. The decision crystallized in his mind. Move Lieutenant Reynolds' platoon to reinforce Bravo Company's left flank. Relocate the TOC to alternate position 3 and implement communications discipline protocol. Yes, sir. Hargrove studied his old friend's face. John, about Protocol Omega. Have you designated the execution authority? Reynolds had indeed considered who would bear that terrible responsibility if the worst came to pass. I have. The authorization codes are in the command safe, accessible only to you and me. If it comes to that, I'll give the order personally. The weight of those words hung between them. Neither man spoke for a moment, each understanding the gravity of what such an order would mean. Let's make sure it doesn't come to that, Hargrove finally said. Amen to that, old friend. As Hargrove departed to relay the new instructions, Reynolds looked once more at the northern sky, now constantly illuminated by artillery fire. The battle for Garrison was beginning hours ahead of schedule, disrupting carefully laid plans and forcing rapid adaptation. This is the real test of a commander, his father had once told him. Not how well you execute the plan, but how quickly you can abandon it when necessary. Reynolds climbed into his command vehicle, activating the tactical display. Reports were already flowing in from forward positions. Enemy armor moving in 3 columns. Helicopter gunships providing close air support. Mechanized infantry deploying in assault formation. All Warhorse elements, this is Iron Horse, he broadcast to the battalion. Enemy forces have commenced their attack. Implement Defense Plan Delta. I say again, implement Defense Plan Delta. As his driver navigated toward the new TOC location, Reynolds found himself thinking not of tactics or strategy, but of his father's funeral. The old tanker had been laid to rest with full military honors, his casket draped with the American flag, surrounded by generations of soldiers who had served with him. In his eulogy, Reynolds had promised to uphold his father's legacy of courage and leadership. Now, as war reached American soil for the first time in generations, that promise would be tested as never before. The 104th Tank Battalion, his battalion, stood as the last armored defense between the Eastern Alliance and their objectives. The next 72 hours would determine not just the fate of Garrison, but potentially the course of the entire Western campaign. A massive explosion rocked the command vehicle as an artillery shell landed nearby. Reynolds steadied himself, then reached for the radio. All units be advised, we are now in contact with enemy forces. Weapons free. I repeat, weapons free. The Battle of Garrison had begun. Colonel John Reynolds crouched low in the commander's hatch of his M1A2 Abrams as another artillery shell screamed overhead, detonating with a thunderous roar among the buildings behind him. Dawn was breaking over Garrison, revealing a cityscape transformed by war. Smoke rose from dozens of impact points, shattered glass glittered on streets, and the acrid smell of cordite hung heavy in the morning air. Gunner T-14 at 11 o'clock, range 2,000 meters, Reynolds called, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Through his thermal sight, he could see the distinctive silhouette of the Russian-designed tank moving across a distant ridgeline. Identified, responded his gunner, Staff Sergeant Maria Cortez. APFSDS loaded. Fire and adjust. The Abrams rocked as its 120-meter main gun thundered, sending a depleted uranium penetrator downrange at over a mile per second. Through his sight, Reynolds watched the round strike the T-14's turret, but to his dismay, it failed to penetrate. Afghanit system engaged, reported Cortez. Their active protection intercepted our round. Reynolds cursed under his breath. The Eastern Alliance's advanced protection systems were proving as formidable as intelligence had warned. Driver, reverse, back into cover behind that office building. We'll try a different approach. The massive tank responded immediately, its turbine engine howling as it moved with surprising agility for a 70-ton behemoth. Once in the shadow of the building, Reynolds switched to the battalion command frequency. All Warhorse elements, this is Iron Horse. Be advised, enemy armor is using active protection systems effectively against frontal engagements. Recommend flanking shots or multiple simultaneous engagements to overwhelm their defenses. The night had been long and brutal. The Eastern Alliance had begun their assault at 0400 hours, exactly as intelligence had predicted, with a massive artillery barrage followed by mechanized infantry probing attacks. Alpha Company had performed admirably in the northern sector, blunting the initial thrust, but had been forced to fall back to secondary positions as dawn approached. Bravo Company was engaged in fierce urban combat along the eastern approach, using Garrison's buildings for cover and executing Captain Ramirez's unorthodox defense plan with remarkable effectiveness. But the enemy kept coming, their numerical superiority allowing them to absorb losses that would have broken a lesser force. Reynolds had been moving between critical points in the defensive line since the battle began, reinforcing vulnerable sectors, rallying faltering units, and gathering first-hand intelligence on enemy tactics. His radio crackled with a priority transmission. Iron Horse, this is Warhorse 3. The voice belonged to Captain Ramirez. Eastern Alliance forces breaching Sector 4. We're encountering a new infantry tactic. They're using some kind of electronic jamming device that's affecting our tank targeting systems at close range. Reynolds processed this information quickly. Sector 4 was a residential neighborhood that Ramirez's company had converted into a defensive strongpoint. Can you engage effectively? Affirmative, but we're having to switch to manual backups. Response time is compromised. Understood. I'm dispatching Charlie Company Reserve Platoon to reinforce your position. Hold at all costs. Reynolds switched channels to contact Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove at the TOC. Bill, we need electronic countermeasures in Sector 4 immediately. Enemy using some kind of localized jamming. Already on it, Hargrove replied. Intelligence says they're using man-portable EMP devices, short range but effective against our digital systems. Tech team is adapting countermeasures now. In the distance, the thunderous report of tank guns mixed with the chatter of heavy machine guns and the distinctive whoosh of anti-tank missiles. Reynolds checked his tactical display. The battle was unfolding across a 5-mile front, with the most intense fighting occurring in the urban areas and along the northern approach to the dam. Driver, move out. We're heading to support Bravo Company. As the Abrams accelerated down the debris-strewn street, Reynolds reflected on how the city he had called home for years had transformed overnight into a battleground reminiscent of Fallujah or Baghdad. American soil, bearing the scars of combat. The thought filled him with a cold rage that he carefully contained beneath his professional exterior. They rounded a corner to find an Eastern Alliance BMP infantry fighting vehicle firing into a storefront where a squad of American soldiers had taken position. Without hesitation, Cortez traversed the main gun and sent a high explosive round into the BMP, turning it into a blazing wreck. Alpha 3-1, this is Iron Horse, Reynolds called to the infantry squad. Situation report, a breathless voice responded. Sir, we're cut off from our company. Enemy infantry has infiltrated between our positions using sewers and alleys. We've got wounded. Hold position, medical team inbound. Reynolds directed his driver toward the next intersection, scanning rooftops and windows for anti-tank teams. Urban fighting was uniquely dangerous for armored vehicles, with threats potentially coming from any direction. His radio crackled again. Iron Horse, this is Lightning 6. The call sign belonged to Michael's platoon, now positioned on Bravo Company's left flank. We're engaging enemy armor attempting to outflank Bravo's position, confirming 3 T-14s destroyed. Reynolds felt a surge of pride. Good work, Lightning. Maintain position and continue to deny that approach. Affirmative. Be advised, we're observing enemy helicopter activity north of our position, possible air assault in preparation. Reynolds frowned. Helicopter-borne troops could potentially bypass their defensive lines and strike directly at the dam. Understood, I'll coordinate anti-air assets. He switched to the battalion air defense channel. Sentinel units, priority target designation. Enemy rotary wing approaching from the north. Engage and destroy. As his tank continued toward Bravo Company's position, Reynolds received a series of acknowledgments from the air defense units. The 104th had limited anti-air capabilities, mostly Stinger missiles mounted on Humvees, but they were positioned to cover the approaches to the dam. They arrived at Ramirez's command post, established in what had once been a bank building. Reynolds dismounted, ducking low as artillery shells impacted several blocks away. Inside, he found Ramirez studying a tactical map, her face streaked with dust and sweat. She straightened when she saw him. "Colonel, situation? We're holding, sir, but it's getting complicated." She pointed to several positions on the map. "They've pushed through here and here, but haven't been able to exploit the breakthroughs. Their electronic warfare is causing problems for our targeting systems, but we're adapting. The bigger issue is ammunition. We're burning through APFSDS rounds faster than anticipated." Reynolds nodded grimly. The armor-piercing rounds were essential for engaging the T-14s effectively. "I've authorized the release of the strategic reserve. Hargrove is coordinating distribution now." A communications specialist approached. "Sir, Mayor Wilson is requesting to speak with you. He's at the high school shelter." Reynolds suppressed a flash of irritation. Civilian concerns were important, but in the middle of an active battle. "Tell him I'll contact him when the tactical situation permits." "He says it's urgent, sir. Something about Eastern Alliance psychological operations targeting civilians." Reynolds exchanged a glance with Ramirez. "Psychological operations? We've been hearing reports," Ramirez confirmed. "Enemy broadcasting on civilian frequencies, claiming they'll treat Garrison as an open city if we withdraw, promising humanitarian aid and protection." "Classic tactics," Reynolds muttered. "Create division between civilians and defending forces." He turned to the communications specialist. "Patch the mayor through to my command vehicle. I'll speak with him en route to the northern sector." Back in his tank, Reynolds took the call while monitoring the tactical display. "Mayor Wilson, this is Reynolds." "Colonel, we have a situation developing at the shelter." Wilson's voice sounded strained. "Eastern Alliance broadcasts are causing panic. They're claiming you refused an offer to spare the city, that you're sacrificing civilians for military objectives." Reynolds had anticipated something like this. "It's propaganda, Mr. Mayor. They're trying to turn your people against us, to pressure you into demanding our withdrawal." "I understand that, but people are frightened. These broadcasts are saying they'll target the shelter next unless the city officially surrenders. That's a war crime, and they know it." Reynolds kept his voice level despite his anger. "What they're not telling you is what happened in Seattle after they accepted surrender. The detentions, the executions, the forced labor. We have confirmed intelligence." "I know, Colonel. I believe you." Wilson surprised him. "That's not why I'm calling. I need your help addressing the shelter. These people need reassurance from a military perspective. They need to know there's a plan." Reynolds checked his watch. The northern sector needed his attention, but the civilian situation couldn't be ignored. "I'll send Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove to address them. He has full access to our operational plans and can answer their questions." "Thank you, Colonel." Wilson paused. "How are we doing? Really?" Reynolds considered his response carefully. "The battle is developing as expected. We've inflicted significant casualties on the enemy. Their advance has been slowed but not stopped. The next 12 hours will be critical." After ending the call, Reynolds directed his driver toward the northern perimeter. Alpha Company had borne the brunt of the initial assault, and he needed to assess their condition personally. The road to the northern sector took them past scenes of destruction that wrenched at Reynolds' heart despite his professional detachment. Garrison had been a beautiful city, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained parks. Now many of those trees were splintered or burning, and the parks had been converted to artillery firing positions or medical triage centers. They passed a school that had been hit by artillery, its playground equipment twisted and blackened. Reynolds forced himself to look, to remember. This was why they fought, to prevent scenes like this from spreading across America. Alpha Company's command post had been established in a reinforced concrete water treatment facility near the northern edge of the city. Captain Thomas Murphy met Reynolds outside, his uniform grimy and his expression grim. "They're bringing up additional armor, sir. Our forward observers count at least 30 main battle tanks assembling beyond the ridgeline, mostly T-14s with some Chinese Type 99 A2s in support." Reynolds studied the tactical map Murphy provided. "They're preparing for a major push directly toward the dam. Timing? Best estimate, within the hour. They're still bringing up fuel and ammunition." Reynolds nodded. "What's your ammunition situation?" "Critical for APFSDS rounds. We're down to 5 per tank on average. Plenty of heat rounds, but they're less effective against the T-14s. Resupply is en route. Reynolds studied the terrain. They'll come through this valley. It's the only approach their heavy armor can use effectively. I want your company to execute a reverse slope defense. Position your tanks here, behind this ridgeline, with just your thermal sights exposed. Let them commit to the valley before engaging. Murphy traced the contour lines on the map. That could work, sir. We can use the terrain to force them to expose their vulnerable top armor. Exactly. And I'm redeploying our remaining TOW missile teams to these positions on the flanks. Reynolds indicated the higher ground on either side of the valley. Crossfire should overwhelm their active protection systems. As they finalized the defensive plan, a tremendous explosion rocked the facility, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Reynolds and Murphy rushed outside to see a massive plume of smoke rising from the eastern part of the city. "Report!" Reynolds barked into his radio. "Sir, enemy airstrike hit the community college," came the response from the TOC. Initial reports suggest they used a bunker buster munition, possibly targeting what they thought was our command center. The community college had been their original TOC location before they'd relocated the previous night. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. "Casualties?" "Unknown, sir. We had a medical unit in the basement. Rescue operations are underway." Reynolds turned to Murphy. "Implement the defensive plan immediately. I need to check the strike site." Back in his tank, Reynolds directed his crew toward the community college while coordinating the battalion's response to the airstrike. The sight that greeted them was grim. The college's main building had partially collapsed, with fires burning in several locations. Medics and infantry soldiers were already digging through the rubble, pulling out the wounded. Reynolds found Major Sandra Torres, the battalion's chief medical officer, coordinating the rescue effort. "How bad?" "We had 23 personnel inside, mostly medical staff preparing for casualties. We've recovered 17 so far, 7 with serious injuries." Torres wiped sweat from her brow. 6 still unaccounted for. "What do you need?" "Heavy equipment to clear the debris, and I need to relocate my primary treatment facility. This was supposed to be our main triage point." Reynolds nodded. "I'll have engineering units here within 20 minutes. Relocate your primary to the high school shelter. It has better protection and is further from the front lines." As Reynolds coordinated the rescue operation, his radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the TOC. "Colonel, we're intercepting high-level enemy communications. They're launching their main assault in 30 minutes. Simultaneous pushes on 3 axes." "Understood. Direct Charlie Company to reinforce the dam position immediately." Reynolds turned to his driver. "Get us to Observation Post 3. I need to see this deployment firsthand." Observation Post 3 occupied the top floor of Garrison's tallest building, a 10-story office complex that offered commanding views of the northern and eastern approaches to the city. Reynolds found Sergeant Major Caruso there, supervising a team of forward observers. "Show me," Reynolds said without preamble. Caruso handed him a high-powered spotting scope. "Northern axis, sir, behind the tree line." Reynolds focused the scope and immediately spotted the enemy armor assembling for the assault. T-14 armadas lined up in attack formation, their low-profile turrets presenting minimal targets. Behind them, mechanized infantry in BMP-3s and VPK-7829 Boomerang armored personnel carriers prepared to follow the tanks through any breaches they created. "Eastern axis," Caruso directed, and Reynolds shifted his view. The eastern force consisted primarily of Chinese equipment, Type 99A2 main battle tanks, and ZBD-04 infantry fighting vehicles. They were deploying in a broader formation, suggesting they planned to probe for weaknesses rather than commit to a single point of attack. "And the third axis?" "Western, sir. They've brought up their mobile bridge units. They're going to try to cross the river and flank our position at the dam." Reynolds studied each deployment carefully, analyzing strengths, vulnerabilities, and likely objectives. The pattern became clear. This isn't a simultaneous attack. The eastern and western forces are diversions. The northern push is their main effort, aimed directly at the dam. "That's our assessment as well, sir," Caruso confirmed. Reynolds activated his command frequency. "All Warhorse elements, this is Iron Horse. Enemy preparing for major 3-pronged assault. Northern axis is assessed as main effort. Eastern and western attacks are diversionary. Adjust defensive posture accordingly." He then issued specific orders to each company, reallocating resources to strengthen the northern defense while maintaining sufficient forces on the other axes to prevent breakthroughs. The battle was entering a critical phase. If they could blunt this major assault, they might buy enough time for reinforcements to arrive. If not, Protocol Omega loomed as a last resort. As Reynolds prepared to return to his tank, Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove contacted him from the TOC. Colonel, we've just received word from Division. The 1st Armored is encountering heavier resistance than anticipated. Their ETA has been pushed back to 48 hours minimum. Reynolds absorbed this news with outward calm, though inwardly he felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. Understood, we'll adjust our operational timeline. There's more, sir. General Daniels is ordering all non-essential personnel evacuated from positions south of Garrison. They're establishing a new defensive line at Sacramento. The implications were clear. Higher command was preparing for the possibility that Garrison would fall. Acknowledged. Any update on our air support request? Negative, sir. All air assets remain committed to defending the coastal cities. Very well. We'll make do with what we have. Reynolds ended the transmission and took a moment to gather his thoughts. 48 hours. They needed to hold for at least another 2 days against an enemy with superior numbers and increasingly accurate intelligence about their defensive positions. He rejoined his tank crew and directed them toward Alpha Company's position. If the northern thrust was indeed the main effort, he intended to be there to meet it. En route, he received a call from Michael's platoon. Lightning 6 to Iron Horse. We've completed our redeployment to the northern sector, requesting final position confirmation. Reynolds checked the tactical display. The northern defense was arrayed in depth, with Alpha Company forming the primary line and elements of Charlie Company in support. Michael's platoon had been positioned on the eastern flank, where they could either reinforce Alpha or respond to breakthroughs in Bravo's sector. Confirm position here, Reynolds indicated the coordinates. Your mission is to engage any enemy forces that penetrate Alpha's line. Hold in reserve until committed. Understood, sir. Michael's voice was professional, but Reynolds detected an undercurrent of tension. Be advised, we observed what appears to be Special Forces activity behind enemy lines. Small teams with advanced equipment moving toward the dam facilities. This was a concerning development. Special Forces could bypass the main defensive lines and target critical infrastructure directly. Acknowledged, I'm dispatching a security team to reinforce the dam personnel. Reynolds had just issued those orders when the world erupted around them. The Eastern Alliance had begun their assault with the heaviest artillery barrage yet. Shells rained down across the northern defensive positions, churning the ground and filling the air with smoke and debris. All units incoming, Reynolds called, though the warning was hardly necessary. Maintain positions and prepare to engage. Through the swirling smoke, the first wave of enemy armor appeared, advancing behind a rolling barrage that was steadily working its way toward the American positions. T-14s moved in coordinated groups of 3, using terrain features for partial cover while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Alpha Company held their fire, following Murphy's reverse slope defense plan. They would wait until the enemy was fully committed to the valley before revealing their positions. Reynolds observed from a hull-down position that gave him a clear view of the battlefield without exposing his tank unnecessarily. Steady, he murmured into the command net. Let them advance to phase line Bravo. The T-14s continued their approach, now accompanied by mechanized infantry carriers. They moved with professional precision, maintaining formation despite the difficult terrain. Reynolds noted their tactics were textbook Russian doctrine, emphasizing firepower and shock effect. When the leading elements reached the designated phase line, Reynolds gave the order. Alpha Company, engage. The ridgeline erupted as Abrams tanks revealed themselves just enough to bring their main guns to bear. The valley below was suddenly filled with the thunderous reports of 20mm cannons firing in sequence. Reynolds observed through his thermal sight as the first volley struck the advancing T-14s. The results were mixed. Several tanks were hit but continued advancing, their Afghan active protection systems having defeated or minimized the effectiveness of the American rounds. However, 3 T-14s erupted in flames, their turrets blown clear of their hulls by catastrophic ammunition detonations. Adjust fire, Reynolds commanded. Target tracks and rear aspects. Overwhelm their APS with multiple simultaneous engagements. Alpha Company adjusted their tactics, coordinating their fire to engage single targets with multiple rounds. The effectiveness improved immediately, with several more enemy tanks disabled or destroyed. But the Eastern Alliance commanders were adaptive. They quickly recognized the threat and deployed smoke screens while adjusting their formation to present more challenging targets. Artillery began to target the American positions with increased precision. They've got counter-battery radar tracking our firing positions, Reynolds noted. Alpha Company, displaced by platoons, fire, and move. The battle settled into a deadly rhythm. The American tanks would fire, then quickly relocate to avoid the inevitable artillery response. The T-14s continued their advance, using their superior numbers to maintain pressure despite mounting losses. Reynolds was about to order a tactical withdrawal to the secondary defensive line when Sergeant Major Caruso contacted him with alarming news. "Sir, enemy forces have broken through Bravo Company's position in Sector 5. Mechanized infantry supported by Type 99s. They're driving toward the city center." This complicated the situation significantly. If they couldn't contain that breakthrough, the entire northern defense could be flanked. Reynolds made a quick decision. "Redirect Lightning 6 to reinforce Bravo Company and seal that breach. I'll coordinate with Murphy to adjust our defensive posture here." He switched to Michael's frequency. "Lightning 6, priority tasking. Proceed immediately to Sector 5. Coordinate with Bravo 3 to contain enemy penetration." "Roger, Iron Horse, moving now." Michael's response was immediate and professional. Reynolds turned his attention back to the northern battle, where Alpha Company was being steadily pushed back by the weight of the enemy advance. Despite inflicting heavy casualties, they were running dangerously low on ammunition and faced the prospect of being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. "Alpha Company, execute fighting withdrawal to secondary positions," Reynolds ordered. "Charlie Company, prepare to cover their movement." As the carefully orchestrated withdrawal began, Reynolds received another concerning report, this time from the dam facility itself. "Iron Horse, this is Sentry 1. We have confirmed enemy special forces attempting to infiltrate the dam control room. We've repelled the initial attempt, but expect further efforts." The situation was deteriorating faster than anticipated. The enemy was pressing all along the line while simultaneously targeting the dam with special operations teams. Reynolds needed to prioritize. "Sentry 1, hold position. Reinforcements en route." He switched channels. "TOC, I need real-time updates on all sectors. We're approaching decision points on contingency plans." Hargrove's voice came back, unusually tense. "Sir, we're losing cohesion in Sectors 4 and 5. Bravo Company is reporting ammunition critically low. Eastern forces have penetrated to within 2 miles of the dam access road." Reynolds absorbed this information, mentally updating his tactical picture. The 104th was fighting valiantly, but they were being steadily pushed back across all sectors. Without reinforcement or resupply, they might not be able to hold for another 48 hours. He made another difficult decision. "Implement fallback plan, Charlie. All forces to consolidate around the dam facility. We'll establish a final defensive perimeter and hold as long as possible." As he issued the orders for a controlled withdrawal to their final defensive positions, Reynolds was acutely aware of the implications. They were conceding much of garrison to the enemy, concentrating their remaining combat power around the one asset they absolutely had to protect, or destroy, if it came to that. The withdrawal was executed with professional precision, each unit leapfrogging back while covering sectors of fire for the others. Reynolds coordinated from his command tank, constantly adjusting the plan as the tactical situation evolved. During a brief lull, he received a direct call from General Daniels. "Colonel, I've been monitoring your situation. Division assessment indicates your position will be overrun within 12 to 18 hours. "That's a conservative estimate, sir," Reynolds replied bluntly. "We're consolidating at the dam facility for a final stand, but without air support or reinforcement, I can't guarantee we'll hold for more than 24 hours. There was a pause on the line. "You know what that means, Colonel. Protocol Omega authorization remains in effect. If the dam cannot be held, it must not fall into enemy hands." "Understood, sir." The words felt like ashes in his mouth. "We're not at that point yet. My people are still fighting." "I know they are, John, and they've performed above and beyond the call of duty." Daniel's voice softened slightly. "But I need to know you're prepared to make that call if necessary." Reynolds thought of the communities downstream, the thousands of lives that would be lost if the dam was destroyed. "I'll do what's required, sir, but not a moment before it's absolutely necessary." As he ended the call, Reynolds checked the tactical display. The withdrawal was proceeding according to plan, with units converging on the dam from all sectors. The enemy, perhaps surprised by the sudden, coordinated movement, had temporarily slowed their advance, likely suspecting a trap. He used that brief respite to check on Michael's platoon, which had been engaged in heavy fighting to seal the breach in Sector 5. "Lightning 6, status report." There was no immediate response. Reynolds felt a flicker of concern. Lightning 6, this is Iron Horse, acknowledge. After another moment of silence, a different voice responded. Iron Horse, Lightning 6. Actual is down. This is Lightning 6 Alpha, Lieutenant Dawson. We've sustained heavy casualties but managed to slow the enemy advance. Lieutenant Reynolds has been wounded and evacuated to the medical station at the high school. Reynolds maintained his professional demeanor despite the sudden tightness in his chest. Understood, Lieutenant. What's your combat effectiveness? 4 operational tanks, sir. Low on ammunition, but still in the fight. Implement fallback plan, Charlie. Rendezvous with the main force at the dam facility. Roger, sir. Moving now. Reynolds wanted desperately to get details on Michael's condition, but he forced himself to focus on the larger tactical situation. Personal concerns would have to wait. Thousands of lives depended on his ability to maintain command focus. He directed his driver to proceed to the dam facility, which was rapidly transforming into a fortress as the remaining elements of the 104th established defensive positions. The dam itself was a massive concrete structure spanning the river valley, with administrative buildings, power generation facilities, and control rooms that now served as command posts and strong points. Reynolds found Captain Chen coordinating the defense. Status? We got good fields of fire, sir. The approach roads are covered, and we've deployed our remaining TOU teams on the flanks. Engineers have prepared demolition charges at key points as a last resort. Reynolds nodded grimly at the mention of demolition charges. Those would be used only if Protocol Omega was activated. And our ammunition? Consolidated from all units. We've got maybe 4 hours of sustained combat at the current rate of expenditure. After that, we're down to sidearms and harsh language. Despite the dire situation, Reynolds appreciated Chen's gallows humor. We've done more with less, Captain. Yes, sir. Chen gestured to the tactical display. Enemy forces are regrouping, likely for a coordinated assault on this position. They know we're concentrated here now. Reynolds studied the enemy dispositions. The Eastern Alliance commanders were being methodical, bringing up additional artillery and positioning their forces to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. They clearly recognized the importance of the dam and were preparing to commit significant resources to capture it. They'll come at us from 3 directions, Reynolds assessed. Main approach road, service road from the east, and possibly air assault on the control facilities themselves. I want our remaining air defense assets concentrated on the dam structure. As they finalized the defensive plan, Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove arrived from the TOC, which had relocated to the dam's administrative building. Sir, update from division. They've managed to divert a single squadron of A-10s to support us. ETA 90 minutes. This was the first piece of good news Reynolds had received all day. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, with its devastating 30mm cannon and precision munitions, could potentially blunt the enemy assault long enough for them to stretch their ammunition supply. Coordinate directly with their forward air controller. Priority targets will be enemy armor concentrations preparing for the assault. With the defensive preparations as complete as they could make them, Reynolds took a moment to check on the status of the civilian evacuations. What's the situation at the high school shelter? Mayor Wilson reports they've got about 2,000 civilians there, Hargrove replied. Medical facilities are overwhelmed. They've got wounded military personnel as well as civilian casualties. Reynolds thought of Michael somewhere among those wounded. Is the evacuation route to Sacramento still open? Barely. Eastern Alliance forces are approaching from the east, but haven't yet cut the highway. We've got military police escorting civilian convoys south. Tell Wilson to start moving people out immediately. Priority to children, the wounded who can be transported, and essential civilian leadership. Yes, sir. Hargrove hesitated. John, I received a report about Lieutenant Reynolds. He took shrapnel from an artillery strike. Condition is listed as serious but stable. Reynolds nodded, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. Thank you, Bill. Before they could discuss further, the radio crackled with an urgent transmission. All units, enemy assault commencing. Multiple armor formations approaching from all designated axes. Reynolds moved immediately to his command position, from which he could observe and coordinate the defense. The Eastern Alliance had launched their attack with overwhelming force, hundreds of vehicles advancing under the cover of a massive artillery barrage. Hold your positions, Reynolds ordered over the command net. Engage targets of opportunity, but conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. The defenders of the dam held their fire until the enemy was within optimal range, then opened up with devastating coordinated volleys. The leading elements of the Eastern attack were shredded, vehicles erupting in flames or grinding to a halt with broken tracks and shattered weapon systems. But the enemy pressed forward with grim determination, using their superior numbers to absorb the losses and maintain momentum. They began to establish fire support positions, their own tanks and anti-tank teams providing covering fire for the infantry now advancing toward the dam's perimeter. Reynolds coordinated the defense with the calm efficiency that had earned him his reputation. He shifted resources to counter threats as they developed, maintained communication with all sectors, and continued to inspire his troops with his presence on the front line. But as the battle wore on, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Ammunition dwindled, casualties mounted, and the perimeter began to contract as the defenders were forced to abandon outlying positions. "Sir, enemy forces have breached the eastern access point," reported a breathless lieutenant. "Engineers are falling back to secondary positions." Reynolds checked his tactical display. The eastern side of the dam was most vulnerable, with fewer natural obstacles and more avenues of approach. "Redirect our reserve platoon to reinforce that sector and get me a status update on those A-10s. A-10s are 15 minutes out, sir," Hargrove reported. "But we've got another problem. Enemy electronic warfare is jamming our communications with division. We're working on alternate channels, but for now, we're isolated." This was a concerning development. Without reliable communication to higher headquarters, Reynolds couldn't coordinate the promised air support or receive updated intelligence. More importantly, if the situation deteriorated to the point where Protocol Omega had to be implemented, he would be making that decision without oversight. The weight of that responsibility settled over him like a physical burden. But there was no time to dwell on it. The battle continued to rage, with enemy forces now engaging the defenders at close range. Reynolds directed his tank toward the eastern breach, intending to personally shore up that vulnerable sector. As they approached, he could see Eastern Alliance infantry swarming toward the dam structure, supported by light armored vehicles. "Gunner Coax, troops in the open," he ordered. Cortez immediately engaged with the tank's machine gun, sweeping the approaching infantry with devastating effect. The M1A2's main gun roared moments later, turning an enemy BMP into a fireball that blocked the narrow access road. For a time, it seemed they might stem the tide on this sector. The combined firepower of Reynolds' tank and the reserve platoon forced the enemy to pull back and reconsider their approach. But reports from other sectors were increasingly grim. "Sir, northern approach is under heavy assault. Captain Murphy reports they're down to their last few rounds per tank. Western sector holding, but enemy bringing up bridge units to cross the river below the dam." Reynolds made a difficult decision. "All units fall back to final defensive positions. Implement Contingency Plan Delta." Contingency Plan. Delta represented their last line of defense, positions on the dam structure itself and in the immediately adjacent facilities. From these positions, they would make their final stand, and if necessary, execute Protocol Omega. As the remaining American forces consolidated into these positions, the enemy assault temporarily slowed. The Eastern Alliance commanders, perhaps sensing victory was close, appeared to be regrouping for a final push. Reynolds used this brief respite to check in with all his company commanders, assess ammunition status, and coordinate their remaining options. The situation was bleak. They had perhaps 30 minutes of combat power remaining at current expenditure rates. After that, they would be effectively defenseless. "Sir, A-10s have arrived on station," announced the communications officer with evident relief. "Standing by for target designation." Reynolds immediately directed the aircraft to engage the largest concentration of enemy armor, which was assembling for the final assault on the northern approach. The effect was devastating. The A-10's 30mm cannons and precision munitions tore through the enemy formation, destroying dozens of vehicles in a matter of minutes. The sudden air attack caused the enemy to scatter, buying the defenders precious time. Reynolds seized the opportunity. "All units, consolidate ammunition from disabled vehicles. Wounded who can still fight to take up defensive positions. We need to make this respite count." As his orders were carried out, Reynolds received an unexpected transmission on an emergency channel. "Iron Horse, this is Freight Train Actual. Do you copy?" Reynolds didn't immediately recognize the call sign. "This is Iron Horse. Identify yourself." "Colonel Reynolds, this is Colonel Martinez, 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment. We're the advance element of 1st Armored Division, approximately 20 miles south of your position. We've been monitoring your situation and are moving to reinforce." For a moment, Reynolds couldn't believe what he was hearing. The reinforcements weren't supposed to arrive for at least another day. Confirmed, freight train. Be advised, we're in danger of being overrun. Enemy forces have us surrounded on 3 sides. Understood, we're pushing up Highway 99 at maximum speed, ETA 50 minutes. Can you hold that long? Reynolds looked at the tactical display, at the remaining combat power of his battered battalion, at the enemy forces regrouping after the A-10 strike. We'll hold, freight train. Just don't be late to the party. With renewed determination, Reynolds addressed his command. All units, reinforcements are inbound. First Armored's advance element will be here in under an hour. We need to hold until then. The news sent a surge of energy through the exhausted defenders. Positions were reinforced, ammunition was redistributed to maximize effectiveness, and a new sense of purpose infused their efforts. But the Eastern Alliance was not finished. Having recovered from the shock of the air attack, they launched a coordinated assault on all approaches to the dam. Artillery pounded the American positions, while armor and infantry advanced under cover of smokescreens. All units engage at will, Reynolds ordered. Priority to anti-tank teams and engineer vehicles. The battle reached its climax as the remaining defenders fought with desperate courage. Every position became a strong point, every soldier a hero. They used their dwindling ammunition with deadly precision, making the enemy pay in blood for every foot of ground. Reynolds directed the defense from his tank, now positioned at a critical junction where he could influence multiple sectors. When an enemy breakthrough threatened the western flank, he personally led a counterattack that restored the line. When communications were disrupted by enemy jamming, he dispatched runners to maintain coordination between units. Time seemed to stretch and compress in the chaos of combat. Minutes felt like hours, yet somehow an hour passed in what seemed like moments. The defenders were pushed back to their final positions, literally on the dam structure itself. Ammunition was critically low, with many units down to their last few rounds. Sir, First Armored reports they're 10 minutes out, Hargrove reported, but enemy forces are preparing for a final push. I don't think we can hold that long. Reynolds studied the tactical situation. The Eastern Alliance had positioned their remaining armor for a massive assault on the dam's southern approach, the same direction from which the reinforcements would arrive. If they could break through before the First Armored arrived, they would capture the dam and potentially cut off the reinforcements. He made his decision. All remaining vehicles with operational weapon systems to concentrate at the southern approach. We'll meet their push with everything we've got left. As the order was implemented, Reynolds switched to a private channel with Hargrove. Bill, if we can't hold, Protocol Omega is authorized. The activation codes are in my command safe. The password is Sarah Juliet 34. There was a moment of silence before Hargrove responded. Understood, sir, but it won't come to that. We're going to hold. Reynolds hoped his old friend was right. The thought of destroying the dam with all the devastation that would cause downstream was almost unbearable. But the alternative, allowing it to fall into enemy hands, was worse. The final Eastern Alliance assault began with a thunderous artillery barrage, followed by a wave of tanks and infantry vehicles advancing at maximum speed. The remaining defenders met them with everything they had left. Tanks fired their last rounds. TOW missile teams launched their final missiles. Even wounded soldiers joined in with small arms. For a few critical minutes, the outcome hung in the balance. The enemy advance slowed but did not stop. They were less than a quarter mile from the southern approach when Reynolds heard the most beautiful sound of his military career. The distinctive report of M1A2 Abrams tanks firing in the distance, but not his own. All units, this is Iron Horse. Reinforcements have engaged the enemy rear. Hold your positions. The effect on the battlefield was immediate and dramatic. The Eastern Alliance forces, suddenly caught between the defenders on the dam and the arriving reinforcements, faltered and began to fall back. What had been an assault transformed into a desperate attempt to establish a defensive position. Reynolds watched through his thermal sight as the lead elements of 1st Armored Division tore into the enemy formation. Fresh Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and Apache attack helicopters brought overwhelming firepower to bear on the now exposed Eastern Alliance forces. Iron Horse, this is Freight Train Actual. We have engaged enemy forces and are advancing toward your position. Be advised, we have elements flanking to the east and west to encircle remaining hostiles. Acknowledged, Freight Train. We'll coordinate to link up at Phase Line Echo. As the tide of battle turned, Reynolds allowed himself a moment of profound relief. They had held. Against overwhelming odds, with limited ammunition and no air support until the final minutes, the 104th Tank Battalion had defended the dam until reinforcements arrived. The cost had been high, nearly 40% casualties among its combat forces, with many more wounded. Equipment losses were even more severe, with less than a third of their vehicles still operational. But they had accomplished their mission. Garrison Dam remained in American hands. The battle wasn't over. Pockets of enemy forces continued to fight, and the larger Eastern Alliance formations north of Garrison remained a significant threat. But with 1st Armored Division now on the field, the immediate crisis had passed. Reynolds directed his driver to proceed to the command post, where he would coordinate with the arriving reinforcements and begin the process of consolidating their position. As they moved, he observed the battlefield with a commander's eye, assessing damage, noting enemy dispositions, planning next steps. But beneath the professional exterior, his thoughts turned to his wounded son, to the devastated city of Garrison, and to the long road ahead. The Eastern Alliance had been stopped here, but the war for America's West Coast was far from over. For now, though, they had won a critical victory. They had held the line. The Battle of Garrison Dam would be remembered as a turning point, the moment when America's defenders proved they could stand against the invaders. And the 104th Tank Battalion, Iron Horse Reynolds Battalion, would take its place in military history alongside the legendary units that had defended American soil in generations past. Reynolds allowed himself a small smile as he watched the 1st Armored Division's tanks advancing toward their position, the American flag prominent on their turrets. They had done what many thought impossible. They had held until the cavalry arrived. All war horse elements, this is Iron Horse, he broadcast to his battered but unbowed command. Mission accomplished. Dawn broke over Garrison Dam, pale sunlight glinting off the still waters of the reservoir and illuminating the scarred landscape below. 3 days had passed since the arrival of the 1st Armored Division had turned the tide of battle. The Eastern Alliance forces had been pushed back beyond the city limits, but the cost of victory was evident everywhere Colonel John Reynolds looked. The dam itself bore the marks of combat, concrete chipped by shell fragments, sandbag fortifications still lining its upper walkways, and the occasional burnout vehicle that engineering teams hadn't yet cleared. In the city beyond, smoke still rose from several locations despite the firefighting efforts. But the American flag flew proudly over the dam control facility, a symbol of defiance and resilience. Reynolds stood at the observation point, hands resting on the railing, surveying what had been his home and battlefield. His uniform was rumpled from too many hours without rest, his face weathered by stress and fatigue. Yet there was a quiet strength in his posture, the bearing of a commander who had faced impossible odds and prevailed. "Quite a view," came a voice from behind him. Reynolds turned to find General Mitchell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, approaching. The two men hadn't seen each other in person since before the invasion began. Reynolds straightened and saluted. "At ease, John," Mitchell said, returning the salute. "I came to see this place for myself, and to thank you personally." Reynolds nodded toward the city below. "It's the men and women of the 104th who deserve the thanks, sir. They're the ones who held the line. Under your command." Mitchell moved to stand beside him at the railing. "I've reviewed the preliminary battle reports. What your battalion accomplished here will be studied at West Point for generations." A faint smile crossed Reynolds' face. "I'm not sure the textbooks will mention how close we came to implementing Protocol Omega." Mitchell's expression grew somber. "That decision was mine to authorize, not yours. The responsibility would have been on my shoulders." "With respect, sir, had it come to that, I would have been the one giving the order." Reynolds looked out over the dam's massive concrete face. "I've thought about it every day since, all those communities downstream." "But you didn't have to give that order," Mitchell reminded him. "You found another way. That's what leadership is, John, making impossible choices and living with the consequences." They stood in silence for a moment, two career soldiers contemplating the narrow margin between victory and catastrophe. Finally, Mitchell spoke again. "Walk with me. There's something I need to discuss with you." They made their way along the dam's access road, passing military vehicles and repair crews. Garrison was slowly coming back to life. Civilian authorities had returned 2 days earlier, and essential services were being restored under the protection of the 1st Armored Division. "The situation on the West Coast is stabilizing," Mitchell explained as they walked. "The enemy advance has been halted at several key points. Here, Sacramento, the Columbia River line. The Pacific Fleet has regained partial control of coastal waters, and we're starting to see the effects of our counteroffensive. That's good news, Reynolds said. What about Garrison itself? The city will be fully secured within the week. We're establishing a forward operating base here to maintain control of the dam and surrounding area. Mitchell paused. Which brings me to why I'm here. I want you to take command of the new FOB. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Sir, what about the 104th? The 104th Tank Battalion took nearly 60% casualties, John. Equipment losses were even higher. Division is consolidating the remaining elements with other units for now. Mitchell's tone softened slightly. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. Reynolds absorbed this news with outward stoicism, though inwardly he felt a sharp pang of loss. The 104th had been his command, his people. I understand the tactical necessity, sir. This isn't a lateral move, Mitchell continued. The FOB command comes with promotion to Brigadier General. You'll be overseeing not just the security of the dam, but coordination of all military assets in this sector as we prepare for the counteroffensive. A promotion to general had been the furthest thing from Reynolds' mind during the desperate days of battle. I appreciate the confidence, sir. When would this take effect? Immediately. The official ceremony will be next week, but I need you to start transitioning now. Mitchell stopped walking and turned to face him directly. There's something else you should know. The president will be presenting you with the Medal of Honor. Reynolds blinked in surprise. Sir, I don't... It's already been decided, John. The country needs heroes right now. What you and your battalion did here, it's given people hope that we can win this war. Mitchell's tone made it clear this wasn't open for debate. The ceremony will coincide with your promotion. Reynolds fell silent, processing this information. Awards and promotions seemed almost trivial compared to the losses they had sustained, the sacrifices made by his troops. How's your son? Mitchell asked, changing the subject. The question caught Reynolds off guard. Recovering, sir. The surgeons at Sacramento Military Hospital removed most of the shrapnel. They're saying he'll have full mobility again with physical therapy. Good. I'm glad to hear it. Mitchell nodded. The president asked about him specifically. Seems Lieutenant Reynolds' platoon's stand at the Eastern Breach has gotten some attention from the media. Reynolds hadn't been aware of this. He'd been too focused on the immediate aftermath of battle, on casualty reports and damage assessments. Michael did his duty, as did all my people. Like father, like son. Mitchell glanced at his watch. I need to get back to the command center. We'll talk more about the transition later today. After the general departed, Reynolds remained alone with his thoughts. The promotion was unexpected, but not unwelcome. It would give him the authority to ensure Garrison's recovery proceeded according to his standards. But first, there was somewhere else he needed to be. 30 minutes later, Reynolds arrived at the field hospital established on the grounds of Garrison High School. The facility had been expanded since the battle, with medical units from the 1st Armored supplementing the 104th's overtaxed medical staff. Though many of the wounded had been evacuated to larger facilities in Sacramento, those who couldn't be moved remained here under intensive care. Reynolds found Michael in a quiet corner of what had once been the school gymnasium. His son was propped up in bed, his torso wrapped in bandages, an IV line in his arm. Despite his injuries, he struggled to sit up straighter when he saw his father approach. At ease, Lieutenant, Reynolds said with a faint smile. No need to stand on ceremony. Sir. Michael relaxed slightly, wincing as he settled back against the pillows. Reynolds pulled a chair closer to the bedside and sat down. The doctors tell me you're doing well, ahead of schedule on recovery. They're being generous, Michael gestured to his bandaged chest. 3 broken ribs, shrapnel in my left shoulder and side. I won't be climbing any mountains soon. Well, we don't have many mountains around here anyway. Reynolds studied his son's face, noting the new lines of stress and exhaustion that hadn't been there before the battle. Combat aged a man quickly. A moment of awkward silence fell between them, both men more accustomed to the formality of military protocol than the intimacy of family conversation. It was Michael who broke it. I heard the 104th is being deactivated. Reynolds nodded. Consolidated with other units, technically. Too many losses to maintain as an independent battalion. And what about you? Michael asked. Scuttlebutt says you're being kicked upstairs. A soft chuckle escaped Reynolds. Promoted, not kicked. Brigadier General commanding the new FOB here at Garrison. Congratulations, sir. Michael's formal address carried a hint of irony. Does that mean I'll need to salute even at Thanksgiving dinner? I think we can dispense with formalities at the dinner table. Reynolds leaned forward slightly. Michael, about your assignment during the battle. Dad, don't. Michael cut him off, his expression suddenly serious. We both know why you put my platoon at the TOC initially, and we both know you moved us to the front when the tactical situation demanded it. That's all that matters. Reynolds studied his son's face, searching for any sign of resentment or bitterness. He found none, only the clear-eyed understanding of a soldier who had faced combat and grasped its harsh realities. Your mother would be proud of you, Reynolds said quietly. Michael looked down at his hands. I thought about her during the fight, wondered what she'd think of all this. Enemy tanks in our hometown, her hospital being used as a battle position. She'd have been in the middle of it, organizing medical teams, probably telling us military types to get out of her way. Reynolds smiled at the memory of Sarah's fierce independence. She never did have much patience for protocol. No, she didn't. Michael managed a small smile of his own. The nurses here said Mayor Wilson is organizing a memorial service for the civilians who didn't make it. He wants you to speak. Reynolds nodded solemnly. The civilian casualties had been mercifully lower than initially feared, thanks largely to the early evacuation efforts, but each life lost weighed heavily on him. I'll be there. He checked his watch. I should let you rest. The medical evac to Sacramento is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I'll try to see you before you leave. As Reynolds stood to go, Michael reached out and caught his sleeve. Dad, I'm requesting a transfer back to the 104th or whatever unit it becomes as soon as I'm cleared for duty. Reynolds studied his son's face. You're sure, after everything that happened here? Because of everything that happened here. Michael's jaw set in a determined line that Reynolds recognized all too well. This is where I belong, where we both belong. Reynolds placed a hand on his son's shoulder, careful to avoid the bandaged areas. I'll see what I can do. Rest now, Lieutenant. That's an order. As he left the hospital, Reynolds found himself thinking of his father and his grandfather before him. Tank commanders all, serving in America's wars across 3 generations. Now Michael would continue that legacy, despite Reynolds' initial misgivings. Some traditions, it seemed, were too deeply ingrained to be broken, even by a father's protective instincts. He was still reflecting on this when his radio crackled with an urgent message from Hargrove. Sir, we have a situation at the eastern checkpoint. Mayor Wilson is requesting your presence immediately. Reynolds acknowledged the message and redirected his driver. The eastern checkpoint had been established where the main highway entered Garrison, controlling access to the city as recovery operations continued. What could be urgent enough to require both his and the mayor's attention? He found out 15 minutes later. A convoy of civilian vehicles had arrived at the checkpoint, families returning to Garrison after evacuating during the battle. Military police had established an orderly processing system, checking identification and assigning returning citizens to cleared neighborhoods where utilities had been restored. But this particular group had encountered problems. Reynolds spotted Mayor Wilson in heated discussion with the checkpoint commander, a captain from the 1st Armored Division. Ah, Colonel, Wilson said as Reynolds approached. Perhaps you can help resolve this situation. The captain straightened to attention. Sir, we have protocols for civilian re-entry to the secured zone. These individuals lack proper documentation. Reynolds surveyed the group of civilians, about 30 people, mostly families with children, looking exhausted and frustrated after what had likely been a difficult journey. What's the specific issue, Captain? Reynolds asked. They claim to be Garrison residents, sir, but they don't have the emergency evacuation documentation we're using for verification. They say they evacuated before the official process was established. Reynolds turned to Wilson. You recognize these people, Mr. Mayor? Of course I do. Wilson gestured to the group. The Patels own the pharmacy on Oak Street. The Johnsons run the hardware store. These are our people, Colonel. They just didn't wait for official evacuation orders before leaving. Reynolds nodded, understanding the situation. In the chaos of the early fighting, many civilians had fled on their own initiative before formal evacuation procedures were established. They shouldn't be penalized for their foresight. Captain, effective immediately, Mayor Wilson's verification will be considered sufficient for checkpoint clearance. Have your people coordinate with his office to update the protocols. Yes, sir. The captain didn't look entirely convinced, but knew better than to argue with a full colonel. Reynolds turned to the waiting civilians. Welcome home, folks. I apologize for the delay. We're still working out some procedural issues. An older man stepped forward from the group, extending his hand. Colonel Reynolds, my son served under you, Specialist Thomas Chen, Charlie Company. Reynolds shook the offered hand, mentally reviewing his casualty list. Mr. Chen, your son fought bravely. He was wounded defending the dam's western approach. We know. We've seen him at the Sacramento hospital. The elder Chen's eyes shone with quiet pride. He told us what you did here. What all of you did. Just doing our duty, sir. Reynolds felt the familiar discomfort with civilian gratitude. Your son did his part and more. As the civilians were processed through the checkpoint, Mayor Wilson drew Reynolds aside. That was good of you, Colonel. These people have been through enough without bureaucratic obstacles. Agreed. I'll make sure all checkpoint commanders understand the new procedure. Reynolds gestured toward the city beyond. How's the restoration progressing? Better than expected in some areas, worse in others. Wilson sighed, the weight of responsibility evident in his posture. Power is back on in the northern and western sectors. Water system is operational, but we're still advising residents to boil before drinking. The downtown area, he shook his head. That will take longer. Reynolds had seen the devastation of downtown Garrison firsthand. Some of the heaviest fighting had occurred there, with buildings reduced to rubble and infrastructure shattered by artillery and tank fire. I've authorized military engineering units to assist with critical infrastructure repairs, he told Wilson. And the new FOB will bring additional resources to the area. So I've heard. Congratulations on the promotion, by the way. Wilson gave him a tired smile. Though I suspect General Reynolds will be just as hard-headed as Colonel Reynolds when it comes to military necessities. Reynolds allowed himself a small smile in return. Some things don't change with rank, Mr. Mayor. Indeed. Wilson's expression grew more serious. I've been meaning to thank you, John, not just for defending the city, but for being straight with us from the beginning. If you hadn't stood your ground at that town council meeting, convinced us to cooperate rather than surrender, he left the sentence unfinished. Both men all too aware of what had happened to other open cities under Eastern Alliance occupation. You made the right choice, Reynolds said simply. Your people did the rest. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a military courier. Urgent message from command, sir, the young soldier said, handing Reynolds a sealed envelope. Reynolds excused himself and opened the dispatch. As he read, his expression hardened. Mr. Mayor, I need to return to headquarters immediately. We'll continue this discussion later. Back at the Provisional Command Center established in Garrison's intact police headquarters, Reynolds found Hargrove coordinating communications with various unit commanders. What's the situation, Bill? He asked without preamble. Hargrove looked up from his displays. Intelligence reports confirm Eastern Alliance forces are regrouping north of our position, sir. Satellite imagery shows significant armor concentrations approximately 40 miles from Garrison. Reynolds studied the tactical map. They're preparing for another push. That's the assessment. They've received reinforcements and appear to be consolidating under a new commander. Hargrove indicated several marked positions. These formations weren't here yesterday. Composition? Similar to what we faced before, but with heavier emphasis on artillery. Intelligence suggests they're also deploying additional electronic warfare assets. Reynolds absorbed this information, considering the implications. The enemy had been bloodied, but not broken. They were learning, adapting to American tactics, preparing for another attempt. What assets do we have available to counter this, he asked. First Armored has established a defensive line here. Hargrove indicated a position 10 miles north of Garrison. They've got 2 full battalions of Abrams, plus support elements. Air defense has improved significantly. We've got Patriot batteries covering the northern approach and regular cap from the Air Force. And our remaining elements from the 104th? Hargrove's expression softened slightly. Consolidated into a provisional company attached to 1st Armored's 2nd Battalion. Captain Ramirez is in command. Reynolds nodded, pleased that at least one of his company commanders had survived to maintain continuity. Get me a direct line to General Abernathy at Division. We need to coordinate our response to this new threat. Before Hargrove could comply, the door opened and General Mitchell entered, accompanied by several staff officers. Reynolds came to attention. As you were, Mitchell said. I've just received the same intelligence. Division is implementing Contingency Plan Echo in response. Reynolds knew the plan. A forward defense strategy with pre-positioned armored units supported by artillery and air assets designed to engage enemy formations before they could approach critical infrastructure. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to review the defensive positions personally, Reynolds said. Having faced these units before, I may be able to provide insights on their tactics. Mitchell nodded. Granted, in fact, that's why I'm here. General Abernathy has requested your input on the battle plan. You'll be joining his planning staff as an advisor, effective immediately. Understood, sir. Reynolds turned to Hargrove. Bill, prepare the command vehicle and get me everything we have on the new enemy formations." As preparations were made for his departure to division headquarters, Reynolds took a moment to contact the hospital. Michael was being evacuated to Sacramento that afternoon, and he wanted to say goodbye before leaving. To his disappointment, he was informed that the medical transport had already departed, accelerated due to an approaching weather system. Another missed moment, another personal connection sacrificed to military necessity. Reynolds pushed the regret aside, focusing on the immediate task. There would be time for family matters once the enemy threat was contained. The drive to division headquarters took them through areas still bearing the scars of recent combat. Burnt-out vehicles had been pushed to the roadsides, craters in the pavement patched with hasty repairs, and military checkpoints established at key intersections. Yet amid the destruction, Reynolds also saw signs of resilience. Civilians clearing debris, utilities crews working on power lines, even a few businesses reopening with handwritten signs. At headquarters, Reynolds found a hive of coordinated activity. General Abernathy, a tall, austere man with a reputation for methodical planning, welcomed him immediately into the command center. "Colonel, or should I say General Reynolds," Abernathy said, shaking his hand, "your experience with these Eastern Alliance units is invaluable. I want your eyes on every aspect of this plan." For the next several hours, Reynolds immersed himself in the defensive preparations. He reviewed unit positions, artillery fire plans, air support coordination, and contingency measures. Where appropriate, he suggested adjustments based on what he had learned during the Battle of Garrison Dam, the enemy's tendency to use diversionary attacks, their electronic warfare capabilities, the strengths and weaknesses of their T-14 formations. As the planning session concluded, Abernathy pulled Reynolds aside. "Your input has been invaluable. The revised plan is much stronger for it." "Thank you, sir. I'm confident in our preparations." Reynolds hesitated, then added, "There is one additional matter I'd like to discuss." "Go ahead." "The remnants of my battalion, the 104th. I understand operational necessity required consolidation, but these soldiers performed extraordinarily under impossible conditions. I'd like to request special recognition for the unit." Abernathy studied him for a moment. "What did you have in mind?" "A presidential unit citation at minimum, and I'd like to ensure the 104th's battle honors and heritage are preserved in whatever new organizational structure emerges." "I'll support the citation recommendation personally," Abernathy assured him. "As for the unit preservation," he considered for a moment, "let me see what I can do. No promises, but your people have earned special consideration." Reynolds thanked him and prepared to return to Garrison. The defensive plan was solid, the forces in position well prepared for the coming engagement. Yet as he departed headquarters, he couldn't shake a nagging sense of unfinished business. Not with the enemy, but with his own command. The 104th Tank Battalion had been his responsibility, his family in many ways. Though regulations and protocols dictated that units be reorganized based on combat effectiveness and operational requirements, the abrupt dissolution of his battalion left both practical and emotional loose ends. On the drive back to Garrison, Reynolds made a decision. Before assuming his new duties as FOB commander, before the official promotion ceremony, there was one more task he needed to complete as the 104th's commanding officer. Upon returning to Garrison, Reynolds issued orders for all remaining personnel of the 104th to assemble the following morning. Hargrove raised an eyebrow at the request, but set about implementing it without question. That night, Reynolds worked late in his temporary quarters, drafting a speech and reviewing personnel files. Each name represented a soldier who had fought under his command, many now dead or wounded, others scattered to different units or medical facilities. They deserved a proper acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. Dawn found Reynolds standing before the assembled remnants of the 104th Tank Battalion. Barely 200 soldiers stood in formation where once nearly 1,000 had mustered. Some were on crutches, others bore visible bandages or slings. All showed the unmistakable signs of recent combat. The 1,000-yard stare, the hypervigilance, the bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. Captain Ramirez called the formation to attention as Reynolds approached. He returned their salutes and ordered them to stand at ease. "Soldiers of the 104th Tank Battalion," he began, his voice carrying across the assembly area. "3 days ago, we fought a battle that military historians will study for generations. Outnumbered and outgunned, with limited ammunition and no air support, you held this position against an enemy that, by all conventional metrics, should have overrun us within hours. Reynolds paused, looking across the faces before him, faces he knew had led into battle, had seen transformed by the crucible of combat. I'm not here to tell you that your sacrifice was easy or that the cost wasn't high. We all know better. We've all lost friends, comrades, brothers and sisters in arms. He gestured toward the city beyond. But I am here to tell you that what you did mattered. You didn't just defend a dam or a city, you held a line that many thought couldn't be held. And in doing so, you helped turn the tide of this war. He saw the impact of his words in their expressions. Pride mingled with grief, determination tempered by exhaustion. I've been informed that the 104th Tank Battalion is being deactivated, its remaining personnel and equipment consolidated with other units. A murmur ran through the formation. This is a military necessity, I understand, even if I don't particularly like it. But I want you to know that I have personally recommended a presidential unit citation for the 104th, and I am working to ensure that the battalion's battle honors and heritage will be preserved. Reynolds stepped closer to the formation, dropping the formal tone slightly. Each of you will carry forward what we built here, the spirit of the 104th, the knowledge that when everything was on the line, you stood your ground. Whether you're reassigned to other units or remain here under the new command structure, you are and always will be part of the Iron Horse legacy. He paused, then continued with carefully measured words. Military regulations don't typically allow for sentimentality. We follow orders, we adapt to changing circumstances, we move forward. But before we do that, before I assume my new responsibilities and you take up yours, I wanted this moment to thank you, to honor you, and to assure you that what we accomplish together will not be forgotten. Reynolds concluded with a formal dismissal, but remained as the formation dispersed, speaking individually with as many soldiers as time permitted. He heard their stories, accepted their thanks, and assured them that their wounded comrades would receive the best possible care. As the gathering concluded, Captain Ramirez approached him. That meant a lot to them, sir, to all of us. Reynolds nodded. It was the least I could do. How are you settling into your new command? Still adjusting? The 1st Armored does things differently than we did. She smiled slightly. I'm teaching them a few of our tricks, though. Good. They could use some unorthodox thinking. Reynolds hesitated, then added, Elena, I want you to know that your performance during the battle was exemplary. Your urban defense strategy saved countless lives and gave us the time we needed. I've recommended you for the Silver Star. Ramirez straightened slightly. Thank you, sir, but I was just implementing your overall plan. With considerable initiative and skill. Reynolds checked his watch. I have to get back to headquarters. Keep me informed about your new assignment. And if you need anything, I know where to find you, sir. Ramirez saluted smartly. It's been an honor serving under your command. Reynolds returned the salute. The honor was mine, Captain. Later that day, as Reynolds was reviewing the final preparations for the FOB establishment, he received an unexpected visitor. Mayor Wilson arrived at the command center, accompanied by several civilian officials. Colonel, I hope we're not interrupting, Wilson said as Reynolds welcomed them into the conference room. Not at all, Mr. Mayor. What can I do for you? Wilson nodded to one of his aides, who placed a document folder on the table. We've been discussing the city's reconstruction plans, and there's something we wanted to present to you before it becomes official. Reynolds opened the folder to find architectural renderings and city council resolutions. As he scanned the documents, he realized what he was looking at. Plans for a memorial to be constructed in Garrison Central Park, commemorating the battle and honoring those who had fallen defending the city. This is quite comprehensive, Reynolds said, studying the designs. It's the least we can do, Wilson replied, but there's something else. He turned to another page in the folder. The City Council has unanimously voted to rename the northern approach road to Garrison Dam. It will now be known as 104th Battalion Parkway. Reynolds was momentarily at a loss for words, an unusual circumstance for a career officer accustomed to command decisions in battlefield communications. Mr. Mayor, this is a tremendous honor. On behalf of the men and women who served in the 104th, I accept with gratitude. Wilson nodded, understanding the weight behind Reynolds' measured response. There's one more thing, Colonel. The memorial design includes a central statue. The artist has requested your input on the representation. Reynolds studied the preliminary sketches. A tank commander standing atop an Abrams, directing the defense. The figure was clearly meant to represent him, though the artist had rendered it in heroic proportions. I appreciate the thought, but I would prefer a more inclusive representation, he said carefully. Perhaps a tank crew working together, or better yet, a simple plaque listing the names of all those who fell in the city's defense, military and civilian alike. Wilson smiled slightly. I suspected you might say something like that. The artist has alternative concepts prepared. He revealed another sketch showing an Abrams tank with its crew, positioned as if defending the stylized representation of the dam. No individual was elevated above the others. It was a team effort, just as the actual battle had been. That's more appropriate, Reynolds agreed. These men and women didn't fight for glory or recognition. They fought because it was their duty, because there was nowhere else to stand. The meeting concluded with discussions of practical cooperation between military and civilian authorities during the Reconstruction period. As Wilson prepared to leave, he paused at the door. You know, Colonel, when this is all over, when we've pushed these invaders back where they came from, you'll always have a place here. Garrison is your home too. Reynolds nodded, touched by the sentiment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That means more than you know. After Wilson departed, Reynolds returned to his desk where a stack of reports awaited his attention. Among them was a transmission from Sacramento Military Hospital, a routine update on wounded personnel, including one Lieutenant Michael Reynolds. According to the medical staff, his son's recovery was proceeding well, with physical therapy already showing promising results. Reynolds allowed himself a moment of relief before turning his attention back to the immediate challenges. The Eastern Alliance forces to the north were still a threat, one that would require all his focus and expertise to counter. But for the first time since the invasion began, he felt a cautious optimism. They had held the line at Garrison Dam against impossible odds. They had proven that determination and courage could overcome superior numbers and advanced technology. And in doing so, they had perhaps changed the course of the war itself. As the day drew to a close, Reynolds stepped outside the command center for a rare moment of solitude. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, gilding the dam's massive concrete face with warm light. In the distance, the American flag still flew over the structure, rippling gently in the evening breeze. 3 generations of Reynolds men had commanded tanks in America's wars, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the deserts of Iraq. Now a 4th had joined that lineage, baptized in the fire of combat on American soil. The weight of that legacy, its obligations, its costs, its moments of both pride and sorrow, settled around John Reynolds' shoulders like a familiar mantle. Tomorrow would bring the new challenges. The enemy was regrouping, planning their next move. The battle for America's West Coast was far from over. But here, in this moment, Reynolds allowed himself to acknowledge what they had accomplished against all odds. They had held the line, they had preserved their home, and no matter what came next, the story of the 104th Tank Battalion, the last Tank Battalion, would endure as a testament to the unyielding human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. Reynolds straightened, adjusting his uniform from habit. There was work to be done, preparations to be made, a new command to assume. The role of Brigadier General Reynolds awaited him. But for tonight, for this brief moment between responsibilities, he remained Colonel John Iron Horse Reynolds, commander of the 104th Tank Battalion. And that, he decided, was legacy enough for any soldier. The end.